We are starting. Good morning. How's everybody doing this morning? So good. I like it. I like the enthusiasm. Appreciate that. So I think one of the things that when we come to church, there can be this feeling that like it's a step out of our week into a different space that kind of like exists here, and then maybe it stays here, and then the rest of the world like continues on. I think we do a big disservice to a world full of people and ourselves when we leave what's happening out there, and we don't carry it in here with us because it matters to the heart of God. We don't have to step out of our lives to come before Him. We bring all of our lives to Him. And the news this week, y'all, it's rough. I've been doing a lot of learning and work in trying to learn what I'm calling rhythms of resistance, because I think there's a lot that is pulling for our energy, and some of that is fear, and some of that is chaos, and some of that is bitterness, and some of that is hopelessness, and some of that is actual tangible things that are happening that we need to be standing up and resisting, creating resistance to. And so what does it look like to learn and sustain rhythms of resistance? And there's a lot of layers to that. A lot of it is learning, like just studying and gaining knowledge and information of history and people that have gone before us and walked similar journeys. And some of it is just finding space to be still. I think worship is something that I have found to be a part of my rhythms of resistance. And so I want to give a space for kind of two parts of that today. As we go throughout our time of singing, there's a lot of songs in here that have some heaviness blended with the hope of who Jesus is. And that's what we know as lament. Because when things are going on in the world and in our lives that are hard and heavy and broken and ugly, we get to bring them to God, and we get to complain. We get to say, God, this sucks. God, this is real messed up. God, this doesn't feel good. If you are good, why is this happening? We have examples all over Scripture of that, of God inviting us into that honest, bold space with Him. We bring that to Him, and then we get to say, but I trust you. I trust your character. I trust who you are. I trust your control. God, I get to rest in that. And so a lot of our songs today kind of have that theme to them. So we'll take some time to lament. But before we do that, the second thing I want us to take some time to do is just be still. And we've talked about this here before, but there's a practice called breath prayers. And it's where you inhale with one thought or expression and you exhale with another. You can kind of tailor that to whatever that needs to be. But some examples would be to inhale Jesus, Father, and friend. And then to exhale, I lean on you. And you can just repeat that. Inhale, Jesus, Father, and friend. Exhale, I lean on you. Inhale, Holy Spirit, active and moving. Exhale, lead me in your ways. Inhale, Holy Spirit, active and moving. Exhale, lead me in your ways. Inhale, good God who is in control. Exhale, I rest in you. Inhale, good God who is in control. Exhale, I rest in you. You can continue that practice as we sing these songs, just taking that space to breathe and pray and allow that nearness of God to be felt in your physical body. I also invite you to stand and sing along with us.
Are you weary, heavy laden? Come and lay your burdens down. Jesus calls you, Jesus draws you, rest in me. He is gentle, he is lowly, he delights to bring us peace. Tender shepherd, mighty Savior, rest in me. How sure his compassion for us. Oh, how deep is his love. So come to Jesus and rest in him. Are you hopeless? Are you guilty? Caught in shame for all your sins? He pursues you to forgive you. Rest in him. He has paid for every failure. Mercy flows in endless streams. Come and follow. Freedom calls you. Rest in him. How sure his compassion for us. Oh, how deep is his love. So come to Jesus and rest in him. Are you waiting in your sorrows for this broken world to heal? He is coming, soon returning, rest in him. We will see him, we will know him. Oh, what heights of grace revealed from his kindness, every promise then fulfilled. Oh, trust in Jesus, he will keep us till the end. How sure his compassion for us. Oh, how deep is his love. So come to Jesus and rest. How sure his compassion for us. Oh, how deep is his love. So come to Jesus and rest in him. never gonna let me down. You're never gonna let me down. You're never gonna let me down. 'Cause you are good, you're good. Oh, you are good, you're good. Oh, you are good, you're good. Oh, you are good, you're good.
So before we leave this song, yeah, we're gonna have to go back to it. Yeah, sorry, that's on me. We just sang these lyrics that said, "You're never gonna let me down." And here's what I want to say about that: is like you're probably in one of two places with those words this morning. Yeah, I'm gonna say one of three places. The first place is this: is that you're in a place right now in which you have seen that aspect of God in your life. Like we sing, "You're never going to let me down." And there are things that you can think of right now. There are ways that you've seen God show up. There are ways that you've seen God provide. There are answers to prayer. There's stuff that you've experienced that makes those words just ring true to you. And then there are some of you who are here this morning and you're in a place where you're like, those words, "You're never going to let me down," are things you're hopeful for. Like you're kind of like in a place where you're like, honestly, life does not feel that way right now. Life does not feel like God is never going to let me down. If anything, it feels like everything's about to fall apart. And for you, those words are not maybe so much flowing out of what you've seen, although there might be things you've seen in the past, but they're more like an anchor or a lifeline or something you are holding on to in the middle of those circumstances. And then maybe you're here this morning and you're not really sure where you're at with this whole God thing. You're kind of figuring out what your relationship to Christianity is. And what I want to say for you is that if that's you, then we believe in a God who in the middle of a broken world provides for his children. And so here's what I want to invite us into this morning. Especially for those of you who are here this morning who consider yourselves followers of Jesus. We're going to sing those lyrics again of like, "You're never going to let me down." But here's the deal. I want us to sing them like we actually mean them or need them. Okay? I realize it's early. It's not that early. It's 10:22. You're awake. But I realize for some of you, like it takes a while to get going. I understand that. But we're going to sing these lyrics like they're true. Okay? So let's sing together.
You're never gonna let me down. 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 just what to do. God, I look to you. I won't be overwhelmed. Give me vision to see things like you do. God, I look to you. You're where my help comes from. Give me wisdom. You know just what to do. I will love you, Lord, my strength. I will love you, Lord, my shield. And I will love you, Lord, my rock. Forever all my days, I will love you, God. God, I look to you. I won't be overwhelmed. Give me vision to see things like you do. God, I look to you. You're where my help comes from. Give me wisdom. You know just what to do. I will love you, Lord, my strength. I will love you, Lord, my shield. And I will love you, Lord, my rock. Forever all my days, I will love you, God. I will love you, Lord, my strength. I will love you, Lord, my shield. And I will love you, Lord, my rock. Forever all my days, I will love you, God.
So as we close out this time of singing together, let's close this with a prayer. This is a prayer that this morning is being said all over the world. It's being said in Episcopal churches and Catholic churches and Presbyterian churches and Pentecostal churches and Baptist churches in South America and Africa and Asia and everywhere else. This prayer is being said together. So let's say it with our brothers and sisters around the world. It'll be up on the screen. Our Father, who is in heaven, holy be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth just as it is in heaven. And give us today our daily bread, and forgive us our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. And do not lead us into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For yours is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever and ever. Amen. God, it is your kingdom that lasts. You reign. Hallelujah. Our God reigns. This world is yours, and the nations tremble before your power. Where does our help come from? It comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. It is in you that we find our life and our hope and our strength. Would your kingdom come in this world, God, and would your will be done? And would all nations and rulers bow before you in submission to King Jesus and your way of doing things? We cannot, God, bring the justice and the change in this world that we want, but King Jesus, you can. It is your kingdom, it is your power, it is your glory. And so everything we say here today, everything we sing here today, everything we are here today, it is for you and through you and about you, Jesus. So we pray this in your name. Amen. Go ahead and grab a seat. Whew. Well, welcome to the Porch Church, everyone. We're glad you're here. Wherever you're at in your spiritual journey, you might be someone who's been doing this whole following Jesus thing for a very long time, or you might be checking out God, Faith Church for the first time, or the first time in a while, to the point where like maybe you even being here this morning feels a little uncomfortable. And I just want to let you know, wherever you're at in your spiritual journey, this is a safe place for you to take your next step toward God, whatever that next step might be. And we want to be a part of helping with that. You're going to see a card on the seat in front of you. If you are newer here this morning and you're up for it, fill that card out, leave it on the seat. We'll grab it later. We would love to get you added to our email and text list, so it's going to occasionally give you a little bit more information about what we're up to and what's going on. Then I would love to reach out myself this week and just introduce myself and find out if there's anything else I can do to help you get more connected here. So fill out the card. We'll grab it later. We have a few announcements to tell you about. First one up on the screen is we are, for the women in our church, doing something called Galentine's Day. It's going to be happening at my house. I will be not there because it is intimidating to be around that many women. And so on February 8th from 5 to 8 p.m., that's going to be happening. Apparently, that's going to be with pajamas and breakfast food and games. And Christina, who's in here this morning, which is very exciting, she's our children's pastor / community life pastor / office manager / person who runs everything. If you have any questions about that event, please feel free to ask her or email her at that email address right there. The other announcement that we have is this. I'm very excited to tell you about this. So we have begun building a relationship with our friends at Prairie Middle School. Yes, indeed. Yeah, what's your connection there? Awesome. Great. I did not know that. Okay, so we recently, part of what's happened with the Christmas store is we've gotten to know some of the people in the Cherry Creek School District staff who are kind of on the front lines of helping out with families who are more in need. And one of the questions we've been asking as a church is how can we just radically love and bless our communities and specifically the schools around us. And so Prairie Middle School, as you guys probably know, maybe you don't, is that heading into things like spring break, there are a lot of families who depend on the lunches and the breakfasts that schools offer in order for their kids to have food. And when those things go away, it is not always certain that those families have the food that they need in the house to take care of their kids. And so one of the things that a lot of schools do, and that Prairie Middle School is doing specifically, is that they basically have a truck show up that has like tons of fresh produce in it, and people just come and hang out in line and they get the food that they need. However, I was talking with our connection at Prairie Middle School, and I was like, well, is there anything that isn't usually covered in that? And she's like, you know what normally they don't have a lot of dairy and they don't have a lot of eggs. And I'm like, well, you know what? We are the Dairy and Eggs Church. What a coincidence. That's kind of what we're known for, to be honest. And so here's what we are going to do. We have until March 9th, where we are going to raise as much money as we can. And so every cent that is donated specifically to this fund is going to go towards providing dairy and eggs so that when people show up in that line, it's just going to be there for free. I don't know. Maybe we'll have a card that's just being like, hey, we're doing this because Jesus loves you. I haven't figured that out yet. But what we are for sure going to do is make sure that these families have all the dairy and eggs that they need. So the way this is going to work is that you can go online and donate there, Porch.Church. You can click on the Give tab. And when you're giving, it's going to ask you what the purpose is for. And you can there's a little drop-down fund where you can do it's community something, I don't remember. Or you can just put a line in there that just says eggs, and we will know what that means because that's pretty obvious. Or if you want to put things here's the deal. Over the next few weeks, if you just bring cash and you want to put it in a little envelope, or I'm just going to say this, I think this is okay. If any cash that's in that box that's out there in the lobby, we're just going to assume that's egg cash. And we are going to use any cash that's in there, and that's going to go towards eggs and dairy. I don't know why I keep focusing. It's because it's funnier to say eggs. And so we are going to see how much money we can raise between now and March 9th. And then what's going to happen is me and other people that I have not figured out yet, we are going to go shopping for an unreasonable amount of dairy and eggs. And then we are going to show up at the school and participate in all that. And also, they could use some volunteers. The event actually happens, I believe it's on a Monday. During the day. And so I know that's going to eliminate a lot of your ability to volunteer, but I will have more details about that next week, about if you want to volunteer, how you can do that. So we'll say that next week. But we're doing that. Any questions about that? Was that clear? Cool. If it wasn't, come find me. It's very possible that I missed something. A couple of other notes that we don't have slides for. First is this. We are, in fact, aware that this big, giant box that used to have moving images on it doesn't. That's actually getting fixed tomorrow. Thanks be to God. And so that'll, hopefully I say that, and then nothing in life is guaranteed. But I feel fairly confident that that's going to be fixed tomorrow. And then also, you might be wondering, we announced last week that we have a student ministry resident who's going to start helping out with our students here named Ian. We're very excited about Ian. He's right there. Someone was clapping. I don't know if that was for Ian or not, but we can let's get it going for Ian, you know? Yeah. If everyone could just stare directly at him right now. And so I haven't even told Ian this, but I think what we're going to do is I'll get all these details to you, but I think my plan that I'm kind of making up on the spot is that 2 weeks from now on February 16th post-service, for anyone who's a parent of teenagers, we're going to just kind of have a time together really quick, and we'll kind of talk a little bit about what's going to happen after that. I think our plan is on February 23rd is that we will start having something specifically for students that happens here on Sunday mornings. But we also have some plans. Our heart, honestly, isn't just to do things on Sunday mornings. That's good, and that's when people already show up, and so we'll lean into that. But if we're going to make this a student ministry that's not just for the students who are here, we're going to have to branch outside of Sunday mornings. This is not the best time to invite a friend, and so we're going to have to find ways because, here's the deal. Our middle schools and high schools are filled with kids who are hurting and who need to know that there's a God who loves them. And we believe that God wants to do that. And so we are going to try as best as we know how. For however long God gives us the ability, the funds, the resources to lean into that, we're going to lean into that. So that's that. And everything that we do. Everything that we do here, our ability to be in this room this morning, our ability to have a preschool, our ability to host a spot for a food bank that meets every other Saturday, our ability to do what we're doing at Prairie Middle School, all of that happens because of your generosity. That's literally the only way that we're able to do any of this. So I just want to say thank you, as always, for those of you who give and give so generously. I brag about our church quite a bit. Because for our small little neighborhood church, those of you who are regulars here, who this is kind of your church home, 80-90% of you give at least something. And I just want to say thank you for that. It really matters. And it's meaningful. And it says a lot to me about what Jesus is doing in your heart. If you are interested in giving, you can go to the Porch.Church, click on the Give tab, or give at the box out there in the lobby. Just remember, eggs or non-eggs in terms of the giving. So, okay. That is it for the announcement. So go ahead and stand. As you stand, remember, we are not just a bunch of people who happen to be in the same room at the same time. We're people learning how to be a church family together. So find someone you don't know very well, have a conversation, get to know each other, be friendly. Yes. All right. Let's give our very much loved introvert friends a break. We've been in a series called The Road, and the premise of this that we started with a few weeks ago is, as the Switchfoot song says, that we were meant to live for so much more. I will not stop. And the premise is that, like, I think we all know that. We can feel that somewhere in our bones, like somewhere deep inside, we can feel the sense of, like, there's a life that we're called for, a life that we know is possible, and yet we struggle to figure out what it looks like for us to step into that. And so over the last few weeks, we've been talking about what does that look like, and we're going to keep talking about that this morning. But before we do that, let's pray. I invite you this morning just to pray a very simple prayer. Just pray, God, would you speak to me this morning? And if you're not sure if God is there, then just, God, if you're there, would you speak to me this morning? And then would you do me the honor of praying for me? God would speak through me, and that whatever's from him this morning would stick, would land, and then anything that's not would just be forgotten, but that whatever God wants to do this morning, that that would happen. Just pray that, please. And so, God, we look to you. You're where our help comes from. Give us vision to see things like we do, like you do. We look to you. We won't be overwhelmed. You are our rock and our hope and our strength. You are our strong tower. You are the fortress that we run to. In Jesus, all of this we know through you. So we invite you, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, to do whatever it is that you want to do in this room this morning. God, what I believe more than anything else, I do not believe in my strength as a communicator. I do not believe in our ability to perform things in this room. That is not what I believe, but what I do believe is that you are a God who moves in this world. And so we make space with the same power that raised Jesus from the dead be at work in this room this morning. We pray this in your name. Amen. So I'll warn you up front, we're about to read a decent amount of scripture passages. And for those of you who have been around here for a little while, you know that every once in a while, I will actually pause after doing that and then ask for feedback of what did you notice or observe or what stood out to you. And I've found that some people, it is very helpful if I warn them that that's going to happen before we start reading. So this is your warning. Let's read together. Genesis 12, starting in verse 7. This part we covered last week. Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, I will give this land to your descendants. And Abram built an altar there and dedicated it to the Lord who had appeared to them. And then after that, Abram traveled south and set up camp in the hill country with Bethel to the west and Ai to the east. There he built another altar and he dedicated it to the Lord. And he worshiped the Lord there. Then Abram continued traveling south by stages toward the Negev. At that time, a severe famine struck the land of Canaan, forcing Abram to go down to Egypt, where he lived as a foreigner. As he was approaching the border of Egypt, Abram said to his wife Sarai, look, you are a very beautiful woman, and when the Egyptians see you, they will say, this is his wife, so let's kill him, then we can have her. So please tell them you are my sister, then they will spare my life and treat me well because of their interest in you. That's not the end of that story, but we covered that story last week. You'll see in a little bit why we just recapped. We're going to jump forward to the next story that happens. This is Genesis 13. Picking up in verse 1, it's going to say this. So Abram left Egypt and traveled north into the Negev, along with his wife and Lot and all that they owned. Abram was very rich in livestock and silver and gold. From the Negev, they continued traveling by stages toward Bethel, and they pitched their tents between Bethel and Ai, where they had camped before. This was the same place where Abram had built the altar, and there he worshiped the Lord again. Lot who was traveling with Abram, had also become very wealthy with flocks of sheep and goats, herds of cattle, and many tents. But the land could not support both Abram and Lot with all their flocks and herds living so close together. So disputes broke out between the herdsmen of Abram and Lot. At that time, Canaanites and Perizzites were also living in the land. Finally, Abram said to Lot, "Let's not allow this conflict to come between us or our herdsmen. After all, we are close relatives. The whole countryside is open to you. So take your choice of any section of land you want, and we'll separate. If you want the land to the left, then I'll take the land on the right. And if you prefer the land on the right, then I'll go to the left." So, my question for you is, what did you notice in all that? What stood out to you? What are thoughts, observations? There's not looking for something here particularly. I'm just curious. What are your thoughts? Abram gave Lot like his choice, yeah? What stands out to you about that? Yeah, absolutely. Someone else. He's back where he started. Elaborate. You caught the line that actually is pretty central to what we're going to talk about this morning, which is and then he came back to the place where he had built the altar originally. Yeah, that's right. It's long story just to get Abram back to where the story started. What else? I'm sorry, say it one more time. Yeah, a land of evil, like he was down in Egypt, and they brought him back to the land of the blessing. Yeah. Anyone else? Ooh, wow, that'll preach. He let the conditions determine what he did. All right, let's pray, everyone. That's it, I think. Yeah, it's good. Anyone else? So here's what I think I notice. This is a story of two very different Abrams. Abram 1, the Abram who's down in Egypt. This Abram thinks, I have stuff. The Egyptians are going to take my stuff. So I better make plans to guard against the losing of my stuff. That's Abram 1. Then you have Abram 2. Abram 2 says, I have stuff. Lots of people are taking my stuff. I'll let him pick the best stuff, and then I'll take the leftovers. These are two remarkably different, it's the same person, back-to-back stories, two fundamentally different ways of showing up in the world. And it's worth noting, like in that second story, the one with Lot, it's worth noting, like Abram is the elder in this story, which means, especially in a patriarchal society, that like Abram can do whatever he wants. He has the rights here. He is the eldest. He can tell Lot, hey, get your dudes in line or get out of here. He can tell Lot, I'm taking the best stuff. Best of luck figuring out what that means for you. And yet, Abram, even though he has every right to show up a certain way, shows up with generosity and peace and kindness and blessing. And what's remarkable to me is that is the exact opposite of the Abram who showed up in the story right before. Abram 1 in Egypt is fearful, suspicious, anxious, a liar, a bad husband, a bad neighbor. Abram 2 with Lot, peaceful, generous, forgiving, a good neighbor. And here's what I feel. I don't know how you kind of connect with this, but here's what I feel while I'm reading this, is that I really want to be like the peaceful version of Abram. But more often than not, I'm the anxious one. Like I really want to show up the way Abram with Lot shows up, but so often I'm showing up the way Abram showed up in Egypt. For those of you who have been around here for a while, you've heard me talk a lot about how there was like a 5-year gap in between working at churches, between this job and my last ministry job. And there's like a whole book of stuff that I could tell you about that happened in that time. But one of them is that around COVID, every source of income that I had built up during COVID was lost. And so toward the tail end of COVID, what that meant was that I ended up waiting tables at a restaurant, and that was the entire source of our income. I'm going to switch mics because the popping is driving me insane. I've given you more warning, Jason, that was still very good. Good job, Jason. And so the question is what to do with this thing that's now hanging around my neck. There's just no non-awkward way to do this, guys. So we're going to... not teaching 101. All right, and so I'm waiting tables at La Loma, and this is, thank you, man, the entire source of income. Everything that my family has is going to come through this job. And so when I started in this job, what I told God is like, God, I want to be a blessing at this place. I want to show up, and I want to be someone who my coworkers are glad that I'm there. I want to be someone who's a blessing to my tables, where I take care of them. And like everything that I do, God, I want to do it in a way that sort of reflects who I believe that you are. And so every day I would show up and I would pray some version of that prayer, and I would try really hard throughout my shifts to hold on to that. And what would happen throughout the shift is that when you work in an environment, especially when it's busy, there's just sort of this chaotic energy that starts creeping up on you, and you start realizing like that everything you're doing every second is a second to maybe make more money or make less money. And I would start off in this good place, and by the end of my shift, someone would tip me like 19%, and I'm like, Lord, smite them, for clearly they have stepped outside of your will. Sometimes it was with my coworkers. There's conversations I remember with some coworkers during that time that I'm so proud of the way I showed up, and I'm so thankful for how God used me in those moments. I really got to be pastoral at times in a way that was really cool. But then a lot of times, not so much. A lot of times, I felt a competition between them and me getting what I needed, a competition for whose food was going to come out first and how quickly I could get my drinks and getting the best tables and then just getting out of there at the end of the night. It felt like everything was a competition between me and them, and there was limited resources, and the way I would show up in those moments was angry and frustrated, competitive. So often in my life, I want to show up, and I want to show up. Yeah, Josh number 1 and Josh number 2, that's 100% correct. Josh number 1 is the Josh that was down in Egypt, and Josh number 2 was the one that was trying to act like Abraham and Lot. And it's like that war within me exists at all times. Like that's going on all the time with me. And there's two ways. It's so clear to me that there are two ways that I can show up in my day-to-day life. And one of them is anxious and frustrated and grasping for what's mine, and the other way is peaceful and generous and kind. I want to be Abram 2, Abram and Lot, and so often I'm Abram in Egypt. And I'm guessing that everyone here knows exactly what I'm talking about. Like, listen, even if I don't know you, I know that you want to be someone who shows up in a generous way in life. You like the idea of being someone who's generous. You want that to be the kind of person you are. You want to be peaceful. You don't want to be anxious. You want to be a blessing to the people around you. You don't want to be someone detracting value from the people around you, but so often relationally, and maybe it's like with your friends, or maybe it's in a dating relationship, or maybe it's in your marriage, or maybe it's with your kids, like you want to show up in a certain way, and yet so often the way that you're showing up is more like the Abram who's down in Egypt and less like the Abram with Lot. We want to show up and we want to be generous and loving to the people around us, and yet we feel like we have so little energy to do that. We want to show up and we want to be kind, and yet there's some sort of anxiety or anger or insecurity in us that keeps sabotaging that. Or maybe it's like with your money, your possessions, your stuff, your time. Like you love the idea of being generous. You love the idea of holding all that stuff loosely. Yet if you're honest, though, it just feels like you're up against it all the time. It feels like there's just such a narrow margin between what you have and what's enough, and like the bills and all that stuff. And what for some of you, what that happens is like it just creates a tight fist when it comes to like maybe it's time, or maybe it's money, or maybe it's love, or maybe it's possessions, or whatever it is, but you're holding it all so tightly because it just feels like there's not enough. I mean, I think we can pretty much say that like collectively as a culture right now and what's going on in our country, we are a country that is living under immense anxiety, I don't think there's anyone who would argue with that we're in a time of intense and immense anxiety, and rather than showing up both individually and collectively as a nation, showing up and asking, how can I be a blessing? How can I love the people around me? The way we are showing up is angry and asking, how little can I give away and how much can I hold on to, and who gets it and who doesn't? And for a lot of us, we're living in the world right now, and like, again, if you've been around here any amount of time, you know me, you know more or less where I'm at with a lot of stuff. But like, there's so much in the world to be angry about right now. There's so much happening that feels alarming and disturbing. But what happens is the person that we become in those spaces, and like for some of us, there's some of us in the room this morning, and I'm kind of including myself in here, where we're trying to show up advocating for the things that matter. We're trying to show up fighting for the things that we believe are true. And like, here's the deal. We might even be right that we are stepping into the places where Jesus is at and advocating for the way of Jesus in those places, but we are not being like Jesus while we do it. Like, we're not showing up in a way where our character and our emotions and our behavior shows the way of Jesus, even if we advocate for the things that Jesus may have been about. We want to do, this is my point in all that, we want to be like Abram too. We want to be like Abram and Lot, but so often we're Abram 1 in Egypt. We don't want to show up each moment the way we so often show up, and yet we don't know how not to. And yet we look at Abram, and he seems to show it is possible for us, even in the middle of trying circumstances, even in the middle, because the thing with Lot was not nothing. There's like a legitimate conflict, and it wasn't just a conflict over resources, it's like a family conflict, and you all know how family conflicts get. And so, like, this is a charged moment and a charged situation, and yet Abram is able to show up in that moment as a person who is peaceful and kind and generous and loving. And what I want to ask is, if Abram wasn't that way and then became that way, then how did that happen? And how can we be like that? And so what I want us to do is look at a key detail in Abram's story that is going to help illustrate the change that happens. And so we're going to go back and we're going to look at some of the stuff that we just read. Then the Lord appeared to Abram, we'll have this up on the screen, and said, I will give this land to your descendants. And so Abram built an altar there and dedicated it to the Lord who had appeared to him. And then skipping forward a little bit, and then at that time a severe famine struck the land of Canaan, forcing Abram to go down to Egypt. Now, if you were here last week, you'll remember that word force only really shows up in the New Living Translation, which is what we tend to use here, but it does not show up in most other translations. Like, I am pretty sure that the way we're supposed to read this story is that Abram is choosing to step outside of God's best and going down to Egypt. And so if that's right, then God promises a blessing. He says, I promise you, I pledge to you, all evidence to the contrary, I pledge to you, God says to Abram, I pledge to you that this land is a land in which I will provide for you. And then when things get really intense, and let's not be too judgy, there's a famine going on here, and Abram has a lot of people to take care of, but I think what we're supposed to read in this story is that Abram isn't able to hold on to that promise and bails for some place that he thinks is going to provide security. And so let's jump forward then to the next passage that we read. So Abram left Egypt and traveled north into the Negev along with his wife and Lot and all that they owned. Now Abram was very rich in livestock, silver, and gold. From the Negev, they continued traveling by stages toward Bethel, and they pitched their tents between Bethel and Ai, where they had camped before. And this is the key line. And Adam, you caught it. This was the same place where Abram had built the altar. And there he worshiped the Lord again. The author makes sure to tell us this is the place where God blessed Abram originally. This is the place where Abram built a pile of stones basically as a remembrance, as a way of looking back and reflecting on the time that God showed up so that when he saw it, he could remember it. Abram has left that. He leaves that. He goes to Egypt. And when he comes back to that place and recenters himself again around God's promise. And here's what I want to say. That when we live in God's presence, we experience God's peace. That I think Abram's
big problem that he has is like there's a place where God showed up, and in that place that God showed up, God promises him something, and in that place, as long as Abram's kind of hanging out near that, there's a way of him remembering. It's like God is going to take care of me, and I'm hanging out waiting for him to show me how he is going to do that. And then the moment that Abram walks away from that place, what starts flowing out of him down in Egypt? Insecurity, fear, a sense of it's all going to fall apart. And it's when he comes back to that place, when he recenters himself in the presence of God and the promise of God, it's then that he is able to live with a peace that enables him to be a blessing to the world around him. And what I want to say for us here this morning is this, is like the reason it is so hard for us to show up in our day-to-day lives, being a blessing, being peaceful, being generous, being kind, being loving, advocating for what is right and true. The reason it is so hard for us to do that is because it is very, very hard for us to go through our day-to-day reality in the presence of God, doing life with him. Something I've been trying to do lately, I can't remember if I talked about this a couple weeks ago or not, but I've been trying to take about 20-ish minutes a break a day where I get still and I focus on God being with me. And basically what I do is like I try to do this around lunchtime and in the evening before I go to bed. And I basically just talk about my day to that point. I reflect back on everything that's happened. And then I just kind of ask God, is there anything that you would want me to see from what I've experienced during this time? Is there anything that you would want to say? This is one of like several habits that I've been trying to build lately. And then I mentioned last week that, I was doing some sweet core workouts, and in the process of that, apparently strained my diaphragm, which then messed up my lower back muscles. I did not know that was a thing that could happen to a human. But I went from I'm building all these new habits, and I'm really proud of myself, to it hurts when I breathe, which is different. And, one of the habits that I tried to build was like really having a separate relationship from my phone, of spending way less time on it. And you know what happens whenever you're in chronic, constant pain is like, you're like, in phone world, it hurts less. Anyway, so I'm trying to get back to those routines, and trying to get back to those routines has been really, really tough. And so I was lying in bed just this last Wednesday. And I had been particularly anxious all day long. I was struggling to kind of reestablish some habits and boundaries around my phone that I had built up. Physically, I hadn't been able to exercise for several days in a row. I could feel how disconnected I was from my wife and from my kids. And I was just tired. And I felt sort of this little nudge of God being like, hey, come spend time with me. And it was like the time that was one of my 20-minute blocks of time. And I'm like, what if it didn't? Because God, I'm tired. And I don't want to, if I'm being honest. And honestly, a part of it was I didn't want to have to deal with all the discomfort that I was feeling. And if I got still, I was going to have to face it. And I didn't really want to do that. But I got up and I went to my spot. Now, my spot is our tiny little walk-in closet in our bedroom. I know that's weird. That's the only space that can be my space. I go in there, I close the door, it's dark in there. I've got my little yoga mat thing, so I'll sit on that because the floor is way too hard otherwise. And I'll just kind of start taking deep breaths in and out. And as I'm breathing deeply, I start letting myself feel how physically and emotionally uncomfortable I am. How emotionally on edge I am. And in that place, how am I showing up? I'm showing up with anxiety. I'm showing up with anger. I'm showing up with selfishness. I'm showing up with pride. I'm Abram 1, right? And I slowly, with each breath, just felt myself starting to let God take one piece at a time. And with each, and the longer that I was doing that, the more I felt myself unwinding and letting go. And it was uncomfortable and unpleasant, and I did not enjoy it, right up until the moment where I did all of a sudden. Because when we live in God's presence, we experience God's peace. And so as I'm in that place, and by the way, it's beyond, in these places, it's beyond just your own personal sense of peace. While I was in that place, I was reflecting back, because I had posted something on Facebook. I got rid of Twitter and Instagram basically, but Facebook somehow is still there, like a Iris. And God told me, like, there's someone who had posted something on Facebook. I hadn't responded to it. I didn't really do anything. But, like, there's something about that person and the things that they had said. And God told me, like, hey, you need to message that random person who is on Facebook. I'm like, what? And he's like, yeah, just do it. And I was like, well, what do I say? And I didn't even really have a lot of clarity on that. But, like, I left the closet, went out into our dining room area, opened up my computer, and, like, messaged this person, be like, hey, this is weird. But I felt like God maybe, like, here's my best shot on what he might be saying. I don't know. And like we've talked about in the series, we're meant to live for so much more, and that's true. But I want to say this, and this is the crux, the core of everything that we're saying this morning. Until we learn to spend time with God in a way that starts becoming more and more a part of our daily moment-to-moment rhythm, until we start doing that, you are never, 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 never going to experience the life that you are made to live without the presence of God being with you in it. You're just not. You're like, well, why is that? It's because that's baked into the story. If you go back to the early chapters of the Genesis story, what happens? God, Adam and Eve, they are walking. It says they are walking in the garden with God. They are in the presence of God. It's like they are with him. They do life together with him, and then everything falls apart. Humans think that they can define what is right and wrong, what's good and bad, better than God. It creates this huge relational separation. And out of that flows all the anxiety and fear and anger and pain, and every single problem in the world flows out of that dynamic. So here's my point in all of that. The way that we are wired to work is to walk with God, to be with God. That is our security. That is our comfort. It's our safety. It's what you and I are made for. And here's what I want to say this morning. If you're here in this room or if you're watching online and you're kind of like, you would consider yourself like a spiritual searcher. You're kind of checking out where you're at with all this. And by the way, whether you are here in this room or you are watching online, just the fact that you chose to be here or to watch tells me that you are sincerely trying to chase after whatever might be true. And I just want to say, good for you. I really respect and admire that about you a whole lot. And I want to say this, like, here's what Christianity, and I'm just going to kind of explain it. Like, here's sort of the Christian definition of what it means to live in this world, which is that, like, the Bible's going to say that we all live under and participate in sin. I kind of hate using the word sin, not because I'm scared of it, but because I feel like when I say it, the way that your brain might interpret it, like, there's like a million different definitions in this room. But here's what I want to say, like, and I'll try to do this fairly quickly, but what I want to say is this. Is that the biblical concept of sin is a disruption of how things are supposed to be. And the Bible's going to talk about this in two ways. The first is going to say this. It's going to say that sin rules over us. Paul is going to say that in Romans. He's going to say that sin rules over us. And so you might be familiar with this, the concept of there being powers and authorities in this world who are not doing the things that you want them to do, and you feeling like that's causing you and everyone else a lot of problems. The Bible's going to look at that and be like, yes, that is in fact how the world works. The systems and the structures and the powers of this world have been corrupted, and they are living out of a way of living that breeds destruction and dysfunction. But the tricky part about it, and listen, what I'm about to say, you already know it's true, which is that it is so easy for us to look at the systems and the powers of this world and blame them for all the problems. And you're not wrong that they are the problem, but we are too. And you know that. You know that. Like all of the stuff that's wrong in the world, it's in me too. We're selfish and we're greedy and we're unkind and we hurt people. We hurt the people we love the most. And we're argumentative and we're hateful sometimes. And we, like, Jesus says, like, you know, to like love your enemies. We're not doing that. We've turned hating our enemies into a virtue. We're part of the problem, y'all. And what the Bible is going to say is this, is that Jesus showed up, and here's what happened. Jesus lived his entire life. So if sin is in part a personal problem, Jesus lived his entire life, and as he lived his entire life, he never once participated in the brokenness, in the problem, in the sin. And here's the deal. Him living that way upset the powers and the authorities of this world so much that guess what? This isn't a surprise to some of you. What happens whenever someone starts actually living it out? They get threatened and they kill them. But in Jesus' death, not only did he live his life living it perfectly, and not only in his death did he take sort of the worst this world had to offer, but in his resurrection, he conquered all of it. He conquered the personal sin, the personal problem that you and I all carry. He also conquered the authority of the rulers and the powers of this world, which means through Jesus' death and resurrection, we've been freed from all of it. Through Jesus, our relationship with God is restored. Because here's the deal. If you're trying to figure out where you're at with this whole Jesus thing, the fundamental problem, the fundamental thing, you are trying so hard to be the best version that you can, and you're probably doing such a good job of being that person, but the reason there's still a gap between the person that you are and the person you know you are made to be is the fact that you are not able to go through your day-to-day life with the presence and the power of God with you. And through Jesus, that has been made possible through his death and his resurrection. That is the good news of Christianity. That's the good news of Jesus. And if you want in on that, if you're like, there's something that's been missing and I know it, and you want in on that, all you have to do is say yes to Jesus, yes to his death, yes to his resurrection. And not only that, and this is the tricky part, this is the fine print, and then yes to his way of living in this world. And if you're willing to do that, then that is your entry point. That is your on-ramp to experiencing the life that you were made to live. The reason that you're having such a hard time being the blessing in this world that you want to be and having the peace that you want is because you are not able to be in the presence of God. But through Jesus, that has been made possible, and all you have to do is say yes to it. But then for some of us, and honestly, if I were here and I was religiously skeptical, I'd be like, that sounds good, Josh. I've seen a bunch of Christians, not excited by what I've seen from them. Yeah, we all see it too. We get it. We know. Here's the deal. I'm part of the problem. I try not to be, but I am. Because the reality is that this whole following the way of Jesus thing is actually really challenging. And I think, honestly, one of the things that's happened with American Christianity is we've turned the good news of Jesus into say a prayer so you can go to heaven when you die. And we missed the part where Jesus said, no, you come and die now and come follow me. You take up your cross and you come follow me. We missed that part of it. And the reality is that for a lot of us, life is so busy. For those of us who are followers of Jesus, we would already identify that. Life is so busy and it is so hard. And this world is set up in counter opposition to the way of Jesus. And every single thing about it makes us showing up and being with God and doing life with God very challenging. Which is why I want to say this. If you are here today and you are a follower of Jesus and you feel the seismic gap between the person that you are and the person that you want to be, there's a part of that is a journey we will all be on. But I want to say this, one of the biggest reasons that you are struggling is because you have struggled to invite God to be with you on a day-to-day, moment-to-moment basis. That when we live in the presence of God, we experience the peace and we experience the power of God. And so here's the deal. Now, on one hand, I know the tricky part of what I just said is it can become a crushing weight that no one can ever live up to. And so I just want to say, none of us are doing this perfectly. We're all on the journey. But I want to say this, every single one of you could spend 20 minutes the first thing that you wake up in the morning and 20 minutes at night just being still and being in the presence of God and inviting him to talk to you. And if you're like, I can't do that. I'm like, well, you could, and if we talked about it, I could convince you, but I can't because this is a big group. So fine, 10. And you're like, well, okay, 5. Anything that's a starting point, anything that's a step forward would be a win. Anything that we do that is in pursuit of the presence of God is a step forward and a win and something that God will use. And so I would ask you this, what is one habit that you are willing to build? And maybe it is you're like, you know what? I'm going to, for me, it's 20 minutes around lunchtime, 20 minutes in the evening. Maybe for you, 20 minutes in the morning and 20 minutes at night. And if you're like, I'm not sure what to do with that time, come find me and we can talk through what that can look like. I would love to share with you what I'm learning. And here's the deal, one of the things I would say, if you take me up on this and you decide to do this, here's the tricky part. There are some of you, oh, God bless your souls, because you're like me. I'm so sorry. You're going to try to turn this into a task to gain God's approval. And this is going to be the way that you make your dad in heaven happy with you because he's kind of grumpy and his arms are crossed and he's kind of waiting for you to deserve his love. There's some of you, that's who you are. I know. I know. It sucks. I'm sorry. Don't do that with this. If you just showed up and spent 10 minutes in quiet, like let's talk about the end of the night. Let's say tonight you spend 10 minutes and all you do, maybe it's not a walk-in closet. You can pick the place. But whatever it is, it's your quiet place, and you just spent 10 minutes and all you did was slow down your breathing and focus, and like literally, I know this might sound weird, literally just focus on Jesus being with you. And you didn't accomplish anything else. That would be an enormous victory. That would be a sizable step forward. You don't have to do anything. Just be in the presence of God. He will do the work. And I want to close with this. It's not just that when we're in the presence of God that we experience the peace of God. What else do we see when Abram shows up with Lot? It's not just that Abram's like this dude who's like, I feel better. No, the way that Abram lives immediately blesses the people around him. If you are a follower of Jesus and you are experiencing some sort of catharsis in this, but it is not turning into being a blessing to the world around you, you're doing it wrong. That ain't Jesus. That's some sort of self-help thing. Great, you meditated. Nothing wrong with that. That's not what we're talking about. The way of Jesus doesn't end with what made your life better. The way of Jesus instantly turns around and becomes a blessing to the people around you. So I'm going to close with this. There's this guy named George Mueller. People who know me, I've been talking about him a lot. My poor wife has heard me say that word so many times. And George Mueller, it's a long story, so I'm just going to tell the short version. This is a guy who had a pretty intense conversion experience. He found Jesus, and he got super intense about following Jesus. I'll be honest with you, as I've read his autobiography, there's some stuff I vibe with, and some other stuff I'm like, you might be emotionally a little bit unhealthy, George. It was the 1830s, though, But here's what I would say. George Mueller read these passages in the Bible, and these passages in the Bible just said, if you ask for anything in my name, I'll do it. And he didn't take that as, I want a speedboat, because those didn't exist in the 1830s. But he took that as, you know what? If I pray for things that God says that he wants to do, he'll probably just do them. And so he did this in a lot of ways. In his first pastoral job, he just basically told them, hey, I'm not going to take a paycheck. You guys can just give whatever you want. I'm not going to ever ask. I'm just going to pray that God will provide. And then as he continues to do ministry in Bristol, in England, he decides that God has a heart for the orphans and he's going to take care of them. Now, I know orphanages now aren't a super cool thing, but when it's that or going to the steel mill to work for 18 hours a week, orphanages are a pretty sizable step forward. And so George Mueller decided he's going to create an orphanage. He never once ever tells anyone what he's doing. I mean, he tells his church community about it, but he never promotes it. He never tries to make he never once, from the beginning of starting it until he died, never one time did he ask anyone for money. He just prayed that God would show up and do it. And so rather than living out of a place of anxiety and fear of what if this doesn't work? What if there's not enough? He would just pray and pray and pray. And the whole number of orphans that were he grew to the point where they could hold 1,153 orphans over 5 different buildings. And he did this for decades. Because what happened with George Mueller is once he started grabbing hold of the presence of God and started realizing that when he was with God, he didn't need anything because God would provide for all of his needs. If we really lock into that, if we really lock into the idea that there is a God who will provide and take care of us, if we really lock in to the fact that in God's kingdom, there is not a lack of anything, then what happens is we are free to be a blessing radically. Wouldn't that be a good use of your life? So come out of the busyness, out of the chaos, out of the anxiety, out of the worry, out of the fear. Come with me. I'm there with you. Come with me as we journey back to the presence of God. And as we do that, find peace. And as we find that peace, God frees us to be a blessing. Let's pray. And so what I want to invite you to do this morning, well, there's 2 things. The first is this. You might be here this morning, and when I was talking about that whole, that you would consider yourself someone who's spiritually seeking or searching, and you're not really sure you'd consider yourself a Christian, but maybe as I was talking about it, you felt this stirring in you, there's this part of you that's I want that. As I was talking about Jesus, and I was talking about sin, and I was talking about how Jesus creates power over sin and frees us from sin and like allows us to be with God again. You're like, that's me, and I want in. I have really good news for you if that's you this morning. And this could be here in the room or watching online. Here's all you have to do. Is just pray a really simple prayer because God is listening right now. God is leaning in. And you can just pray something like this. And you can use your own words. I'm just kind of giving you a format. Of like, Jesus, I see the sin in this world. And I see the sin in me. And I feel both trapped in the problem, and I feel like I'm part of the problem. I know I am. So Jesus, if you can free me from this, if your death and your resurrection reconnects me to God, if I can be the person I was made to be through you, then I say yes. And I don't know what your way of living is like exactly, but I want to learn. So would you show me what it means to follow you from now on? And then for the rest of you who are here, I want to invite you just to tell God, what is the thing that you want to say yes to? Maybe it's a commitment to spending, and you can pick the amount of time in the morning or in the evening or at noon in the evening, or maybe it's something else. Maybe you want to step into like a different habit or pattern. Honestly, that was just one example. It could be a lot of things. But what is one way that you want to say yes this morning to experiencing God's presence throughout your day? And just tell him that. All right, we're going to close with a song this morning. This is a new song. We've never sung this here before, but this song, if you're familiar with Psalm 23, "The Lord is my shepherd," that psalm, this is a song that the lyrics are all coming from that. This song is an invitation out of the busyness, out of the scarcity, out of Abram 1 living. It's the invitation of us asking God, would you take me out of that and into a life of generosity? We'll have the words up on the screen. Feel free to jump in as you start learning the song, but let's listen to this together.
Oh, good shepherd, would you teach me how to rest? I'm rushing on, would you make me to lie down? Will you build a fort by the waters that refresh? Or will you call my name and lead me safely out? From my anxious drive to labor on and on, from the restless grind that has put my mind to sleep, will you call me back and gently slow me down? Will you show me now what's to lose and what to keep? Oh, good shepherd, oh, good friend, slow me down, slow me down. Oh, good shepherd, oh, good friend, slow me Grasping hands, afraid you won't provide. Will you pour the wine that loosens up my wound? Set your table here with what truly satisfies. Oh, good shepherd, oh, good friend, slow me down, slow me down. Oh, good shepherd, oh, good friend, slow me down, slow me down. On the busy streets, trying to make myself a name. If the work is yours, there is nothing I can claim. Will you lead me home to the pastures of your peace? The house is yours, I'm sitting at your feet. And oh, good shepherd, oh, good friend, slow me down, slow me down. Oh, good shepherd, oh, good friend, slow me down, slow me down, slow me down, slow me down.
Let's go ahead and stand. And I'll just say this as we close, like that's the invitation that you're being invited into. And on one hand, if I asked you, do you want to slow down and experience God's presence? If you're honest, there's a part of you that's going to say no. But then isn't there another deeper part of you that wants that more than anything? And what if that was possible? And if you're here this morning and you would say that you said that prayer and you like whatever it means to become a Christian or accept Jesus or whatever, you did that this morning and you've never done that before, find one of our cards. You can just write your name and your number and then just like write Jesus on there or something and I'll know what that means. I would love to reach out this week and just connect with you about that and about any next steps that you can take as you start this journey of following Jesus. But as we go this morning, would you hold out your hands to receive this blessing? As you enter a world of scarcity and fear, may you remember that God is good. He will provide you with all that you need. When you doubt that God is good, may you turn your eyes toward Jesus and see the fullness of who God is in him. When you are told to hoard your time and your money, may you give them extravagantly instead. And when you are told to hate your enemy, may you remember that you are free to love them instead. May you remember that Jesus is not the property of any political party and that we are to love our neighbors, which includes those we passionately disagree with. May you remember that you are a child of the King of this world and the next, that the same power that raised Jesus from the dead is at work in you, and that where you go, the spiritual powers of this world must flee before the presence of the resurrected Jesus in you. So may you be filled with Holy Spirit, and may you shine brightly in your homes and in your work and in your life. I claim this blessing over you in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Go in the power and the presence of God this week, and remember, eggs. All right.